Hey guys, GameBoy3800 here once again, and in this review I'm going to be reviewing the Sega Genesis over here and the Super Nintendo over here. Now both of these were great systems, but I'm going to do a little head-on-head battle to see who will win. So let's start off with, like, I guess round one you could call it. But first of all, the Sega Genesis was released first. It was the second 16-bit console. The first, I believe, was the Intellivision. Don't see how, but it had many great games like Sonic. Super Nintendo had Mario. The original NES also had Mario, and at the end of the Sega Master System's life, they came out with Sonic for that. Now for the Super Nintendo, it came out 2 years later in the US after the Sega Genesis. Let's take a little look at cartridge. Whoa! Let's take a little look at cartridge comparisons. Taking a look at the Sega Genesis, you can see that it's a whole lot smaller than the Super Nintendo. So, with the Sega Genesis being released earlier and having smaller cartridges being more convenient, 2 points automatically. But it had basically all the same games. With Super Nintendo, it had the same games as the NES, but it came out with newer ones like Mario Kart. Sorry, that's my puppy. Don't know what's going on. But the Super Nintendo was very tough against pirated games. There was only one pirated game ever, Super Noah's Ark 3D. You can see it. You can see the angry video game nerd of that in his Bible Games review, Bible Games 2. But this one, I believe, is an unlicensed game for the Sega Genesis. You can see below that it's kind of mutated and it's not as wide. With this, you can put it in the Sega Genesis, so it'll still work. But I found like another secret way, I guess you could put it, is it actually fits in backwards. Now I haven't tested it yet. I doubt it would work, but still. Can I do that with Super Nintendo? What the? You could, but it wouldn't turn on. And it didn't go down all the way. But when the Super Nintendo slowly started gaining up on the Sega Genesis, even after its 2-year lead, Sega started to get afraid, therefore released the Sega CD unit. I have the Sega CD unit Mark II, I guess you could call it. Much smaller than the Model 1, where the Genesis sat on top and it had an opening tray. But either way, they both did the same things. They played special CD games and music CDs. So it was like a music CD player, and at the time they're starting to get popular, and this little beast had stereo sound, so you could listen to AC/DC and rock on. And that therefore launched the Genesis ahead of its prime competitor, the Super Nintendo. But slowly the Super Nintendo still caught up, and Sega once again started to get afraid. Therefore they launched the Sega 32X. They put that in, and it was compatible with our 16-bit Genesis games, as you could see. With this, it also has the mutation where you can fit the games in backwards. Doesn't work. But it also had its own library of 32-bit games. Most popular one, or the best one, I believe, is Knuckles Chaotix, and their most popular is Doom, yet it wasn't the best. Bad music and sound. But even so, Nintendo launched Donkey Kong Country and made the poor Genesis system look pathetic. And now gamers at the time were like, why do we need all this? Super Nintendo was just a standalone system, and it was still beating the Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X combined. If you take a look at the bottom of the Super Nintendo, it has an expansion port. Never released in the US, but in Japan they had a CD unit. But Nintendo never launched it in the US because they were afraid it would have the same fate as the Sega CD not doing too well. So, in the end, Nintendo won the 16-bit era. And Sega also launched another system called the Sega CDX that had a Sega Genesis and the Sega CD unit in one compact unit. I don't have it yet. I'm looking for it right now. Be quiet, Junior. He's my puppy. In one compact unit, about the size of a everyday MP3 player. But the ultimate bonehead. Hang on, I wait until the dog stops. Okay, glad that's over. But either way, the CDX launched at a price of $400, and that was kind of a huge mistake Sega did, since you could buy these two for $100 less, $300 at the time. I got these two for 25 bucks, including a 32X. And overall, Nintendo won and Super Nintendo lived until 1998. Sega Genesis 1997, as far as I know. So overall, they're both great systems, but in the end, Super Nintendo has won. In my opinion, I like the Sega Genesis better. But I also like the Super Nintendo. I have more games for the Super Nintendo than I do the Genesis. So overall, I'm glad Sega at least tried. They tried hard, yet they didn't win. If that were to work, that would be awesome.